Who would want to be an owner given what's going on in sports right now? Raise your hand, A-Rod. You want to be an owner. J-Lo, come on. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're sure. Yes, you are. News came out yesterday that A-Rod and J-Lo are putting their group together. Now, we knew they bid on the Mets. We knew that they had around a $1.6, $1.7 billion bid. The Mets had a deal for $2.6 billion with Steve Cohen. Steve Cohen is now rebidding it around $2 billion because the $2.6 billion deal fell apart. Bunch of finalists for the Mets. Why are we talking A-Rod and J-Lo again? Because here's what they're doing. Just announced yesterday, and it was a fun one. A-Rod and J-Lo have gotten a bunch of athletes to join their ownership group. They released a bunch of names, a bunch of current football players, a bunch of old Hall of Fame football players like Brian Urlacher, a basketball player, current Bradley Beal, all sorts of players joining A-Rod and J-Lo's bid. Brian Urlacher gave a quote that he shouldn't be giving, talking because if you want to be an owner of a Major League Baseball team and you haven't yet been approved, word to the wise, shut up. Don't talk. You got to go straight Aaron Burr. Listen more, talk less. Is it talk less, listen more? Talk less, listen more. Don't let them know what you are for. I think I'm missing a few words there, Coca. In any case, Brian Urlacher said it would be an honor. Who wouldn't want to join A-Rod and J-Lo? They are committed. How cool is it to own a team? I feel it's my responsibility to explain to Brian Urlacher, Bradley Beal, and everyone who's reading about all these big-name athletes joining the A-Rod bid. Let me explain what's happening. When you bid $1.7 billion for a team, you actually don't need to write a check for $1.7 billion. So 1.7, if that's your bid, is called an enterprise valuation of a team. And from that number, there are deductions that happen. So let's say that you've got money that you're borrowing from a bank, and you can borrow up to $500 million in this transaction. Okay, now I need to come up with $1.2 billion. Now let's say that there was already debt existing with the Mets, which there is, and it's franchise-related debt. Let's say it's $250 million. So you take $1.2 million, because we went from 1.7 to 1.2, remember? Now you take another $200 million off, you're down to $1 billion. Then there are other adjustments that take place. Let's pretend that the Mets were paying a player for the next 20 years. Let's say they had deferred comp to a player. Just take any player. Let me give you an example. Let me think. All right, is there any player who the Mets are paying? Let me think. Wait for it. Bobby Bonilla. Let's just take him. Let's pretend that Bobby Bonilla every July 1st gets paid $1 million by the Mets until the year 2030. So if you're buying the Mets right now, you look at their documents, you get the right to look at their confidential financial information. You don't go on Twitter. You don't Google it. You see right there on a piece of paper that the Mets owe Bobby Bonilla $1 million every July 1st. A-Rod, really his attorneys, trust me, it's not A-Rod or J-Lo or Urlacher or Beal or any of them. The attorney would say to the Mets attorney, listen, we're not paying Bobby Bonilla. That was your contract. He's not even a current day asset. That's a straight liability. We don't want to assume that liability. So you're going to have to give us $1 million every year until 2030. And we'll give that $1 million to Bonilla because we're going to be the Mets going forward. And Bonilla wants to get paid by the Mets. But I don't want to come running to you, Fred and Jeff Wilpon, until the year 2030. So let's say that there are 10 more payments at $1 million. There's 10 more million owed to Bonilla. We'll present value it to today. We'll agree on a discount rate, which means we're calculating what $1 million a year for 10 years is worth today. And let's pretend it's worth $9.3 million. We're going to take $9.3 million down from the billion, and we then will be responsible to pay Bonilla $1 million a year. There are 50 or 75 other issues like that, which are called purchase price adjustments. Those adjustments come off the 1.7 billion, which went down to 1.2 billion because you're borrowing 500 million, which went down to 1 billion because you're assuming $200 million in debt, which went to under $993 million. Keep going. So let's say you end up with a number of $800 million. That is what the group led by A-Rod literally has to write a check for when they close and buy the Mets. So what they then have to prove to baseball and to the Wilpons is that they've got people where you put them all together. They will all write a check on the day of closing. It actually is a wire, but they will agree. They're going to all pool their money together and they'll come up with $883 million. The Wilpons get that $883 million and they give the Mets. There's about 10 more complications there. But for purposes of this story, what A-Rod has been doing this entire time is going around and trying to raise that money because he wants to be the control partner, which I told you he won't be, but he wants to be an owner of the Mets. So let's say he's putting in $100 million. J-Lo's putting in $100 million. They got Vinny Viola to put in $200 million, the owner of the Florida Panthers here in Fort Lauderdale and Broward. They got the John Rapoport to put in another $200 million. So now we're up to $600 million. Well, wait, there's still $200 million short under my math equation. A-Rod and J-Lo go to the Rolodex. By the way, I'm eating so much hair. I don't know if you're watching this or listening to this. The hair from my beard and mustache is permanently in my mouth, and it's making me insane. You're seeing me pick at it if you're watching on YouTube. I'm literally going crazy. So A-Rod and J-Lo were out raising money from individuals, but they're not raising it in large increments. Now it's all relative, right? 3 million here, 5 million here, 6 million here, maybe 10 million there. So Urlacher, Beal, when they say that they are joining and A-Rod and J-Lo come to this unbelievable list of owners, they're not putting in a super huge amount of money. I mean, listen, rumors are Michael Jordan is one of the owners of the Marlins. Wonder how much money he put in. Not that much. There are all types of celebrity owners of teams all over the place. Remember back in the day when the Miami Dolphins had Venus and Serena Williams and Mark Anthony and a bunch of other local celebrities as part owners of the team, and they would walk the red carpet in Miami and it would all be very exciting. And then Stephen Ross sort of realized, people don't actually care about that. People care about winning games. So the message I have for you, A-Rod and J-Lo, is the Wilpons don't care at all about your exciting list of athletes. It is not giving you a leg up. Now, there are reports that Jeff Wilpon has gone public saying that he wants to sell the team to A-Rod. Sources. It's sources. It's in the quiet of the back room of Citi Field. That's like me saying I wanted to sell to Jeb Bush, or I wanted Jeffrey Loria, the owner of the team, to sell to Jeb Bush. I couldn't care less. Literally, I couldn't care less who bought the Marlins. We were trying to get the biggest price, and the 23 votes needed to confirm the sale. You think Jeff Wilpon for 1 second prefers A-Rod and J-Lo and is going to take a bid $100 or $200 million lower because he wants to screw Steve Cohen because he had such a public fight with him? It's not going to happen. The job of the partnership, and the Wilpons are in a partnership with Steve Cohen, ironically enough, the job is to get the highest price you can. Steve Cohen is a limited partner of the Mets. He could say to the general partner of the Mets, Wilpon, how could you sell to A-Rod for 1.7 when you had another buyer at $2 billion? That's unacceptable. You left $300 million on the table. I own 10% of the team. Give me my $30 million. Wilpon doesn't care who he sells to. And A-Rod, your bid doesn't get better because you're Brian Urlacher. Nice guy, by the way. Bradley Beal, great guy. Great names to have. Do you know what they have to do to become owners? Here's a little side note, Coca. They have to fill out so many forms that their eyes are going to start rolling to the top of their head. They have to be approved by Major League Baseball. There's an office within Major League Baseball about 10 steps below the commissioner where they go through and they vet all the individual partners who are trying to buy a team. So there are forms that have to be filled out. So here's the phone call from A-Rod to Bradley Beal or Brian Urlacher. Hey, Brah, you're going to get an email from MLB. Don't spam it. Open it. You're going to want to get lawyers because the forms are extensive. You're going to have to disclose every penny you have, every entity in which you have an ownership interest. You're going to have to disclose a lot more than your last known address. We're going to need a real cell phone number, not a burner phone, and we're going to need some bank statements, not the kind of bank statements used in a family dispute. I'm talking about actuals. I mean, no one would do that. That's against the law, of course. It's a pain in the neck. Wait to see. It's not a wait to see. It's just A-Rod and J-Lo. They announced all these stars and people got excited. I didn't. Didn't matter to me.